Kine Valley lay 20 miles north of Millbrook, where the last power line faded into the tree line and the asphalt fractured into gravel. Locals still called it Kine Valley, a name that had outlived the maps and the people who first spoke it. For nearly 2 centuries, the land had carried the Blackwood name, and with it, a history no one in Millbrook was eager to discuss. The earliest record dated back to 1831. Eli Blackwood, a trapper from Virginia, had settled there with his hunting dogs and built a homestead in the lower basin. According to surviving logs, he lived simply and alone, surviving on what he trapped. Around 1843, those logs began to mention sickness among the animals, an infection that spread through bites and left wounds that refused to heal. Within a generation, the family's isolation had become complete. Millbrook's older residents recalled the shift through second-hand stories. The Blackwoods had stopped attending church. Their children were rarely seen, and when they were, people noticed things that didn't sit right. An awkward gait, a strange pallor, eyes that caught the light wrong. By the 5th generation, the family had become little more than rumor, a name used to warn children against wandering north. Dr. Morgan Hayes, an anthropologist from the University of Chicago, had found those fragments in county archives before setting out. The case interested her for what it revealed about isolation and folklore, not for the supernatural theories attached to it. She brought along Leo Chen, a graduate researcher responsible for field photography and documentation. Together they made the 6-hour drive from Chicago to Millbrook in early October, tracing the legend to its last surviving coordinates. Millbrook was a town of 900, the kind that closed at sundown. They arrived under a lowering sky, the air thick with wood smoke and wet soil. The main street held 1 diner, 2 gas pumps, and a sheriff's office, a place that noticed outsiders immediately. Their arrival was met with polite distance. When Morgan mentioned the name Blackwood, that distance hardened. The waitress pretended not to hear. The man at the counter stopped chewing. Someone muttered, "Still asking about them?" before leaving cash on the table and stepping outside. Leo recorded the reaction in his notebook without comment. Silence in small towns was often more revealing than speech. By late afternoon they had gathered only scraps. The valley was dangerous after dark. Dogs still roamed feral in the woods. And whatever's left up there isn't right. The last road sign for Kine Valley had been torn down decades earlier. Before dusk, Morgan booked 2 nights at the Millbrook Inn. Her plan was simple: survey the valley, collect oral histories, and leave before the weather turned. Yet even from her window she could see the ridgeline, black against the horizon, a gap where no smoke ever rose. Locals called it cursed ground. To Morgan it was fieldwork. But every story, she knew, began the same way, with someone who thought they were only there to observe. The diner sat at the end of Millbrook's single main road, its neon sign humming faintly in the cold air. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried batter hung over everything. Morgan and Leo took a corner booth where they could watch the few remaining patrons. They were careful with their questions at first, mentioning historical research and family records. The name Blackwood did the rest. Conversations around them slowed. A fork clattered against a plate. The man at the counter, gray beard, mechanic's jacket, turned halfway toward them but didn't speak. The waitress topped off their cups and kept moving. The silence felt rehearsed, like a story everyone knew but no one wanted to repeat. Morgan kept her tone neutral, as though she were conducting an interview for a rural development study. She asked about property lines, about access roads north of town. Most replies were short. No one goes that way anymore. When she pressed, the waitress muttered that the valley changes people, and left the pot of coffee on the table without asking for payment. Leo wrote in his notebook, marking phrases and pauses more than facts. Patterns mattered. Who spoke, who looked away, who left. Within 20 minutes, 4 customers had quietly exited. The only person who stayed was the man at the counter. Eventually, he set down his mug and came over. He introduced himself as Jason Miller, late 20s, local build, clothes worn thin from farm work. He asked if they were headed to the valley. When Morgan nodded, his expression tightened, not in anger but pity. Jason said he'd gone near the Blackwood property once, years ago, hunting deer near the ridgeline. He remembered shapes moving through the trees, too upright for dogs, too bent for people. Their gait was uneven, almost painful, and the eyes caught light like glass. He claimed he'd heard breathing close by, heavy and coordinated, but nothing followed him home. He didn't stay long after that. "They watch from the dark," he said quietly, "and the dark starts watching back." It was the kind of statement that sounded like folklore until you saw how still his hands had gone. When Morgan offered payment for directions, he hesitated, then agreed to drive them part way, only part way. He insisted he'd stop at the last junction before the valley road. No farther. The waitress returned once he'd left their booth. She didn't refill their cups this time. "If they ask you to stay the night," she said, not meeting Morgan's eyes, "you leave. No matter what time it is. You leave." Outside, evening had begun to close over the town. The streetlights flickered on, revealing fog rolling down from the hills. Leo packed the camera, still unused. Morgan folded her notes, each line underlined twice. By the time they stepped into the parking lot, the diner lights were dimming. The road north waited, cutting into the trees like a scar. Jason's truck idled nearby, engine running, headlights fixed toward the valley. No one spoke as they climbed in. The warning didn't need repeating. Jason's truck left the pavement 15 minutes north of Millbrook. The hum of the tires gave way to the grinding of gravel, then dirt. The road narrowed until branches scraped the sides of the vehicle. Morgan watched the odometer tick slowly upward, while Leo logged coordinates on his handheld GPS. The last radio signal had vanished 10 miles back. The higher they climbed, the more the forest changed. Trees grew dense and colorless, trunks warped by moss and lichen. No fences, no mailboxes, no signs of property boundaries, just silence broken by the low knock of the engine. Jason drove with both hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't speak for most of the trip. When he finally did, his voice was low, almost apologetic. "You'll know the split when you see it. After that, it's all Blackwood land." Morgan noted the remark. The valley wasn't on any modern survey. It existed through rumor and deed records that stopped in 1938. Beyond this point, the map turned blank. A sound carried through the trees then, something between a bark and a cough, echoing off the slopes. Jason's foot eased off the gas. "Coyotes," he said quickly, but the tone didn't match the word. Whatever it was, it came in pairs, then trios, as if answering one another. The rhythm followed them for several minutes before falling away. They reached the junction just before dusk. The road forked. One path continued north, the other disappeared behind a curtain of pines. Jason stopped there and cut the engine. "That's as far as I go," he said. He didn't look at them when he spoke. Morgan offered payment, but he waved it off. "Keep your money, just don't stay up there after dark. Folks who do don't come back the same." Leo recorded the final mileage, noted elevation, and took a still of the branching roads. The temperature had dropped sharply. Breath hung in the air. Jason turned the truck around before they had finished unloading their gear. The sound of his tires faded quickly, swallowed by the forest. The remaining distance had to be walked. Morgan led, map folded in her jacket pocket, the trail faint beneath fallen leaves. Every step forward made the silence heavier. Once Leo turned sharply, convinced he'd heard movement behind them. The woods gave nothing back. No wind, no birds, no visible cause. An hour later the trees thinned. The valley opened without warning, a bowl of fog and dark soil surrounded by hills. In its center stood the Blackwood farmhouse. The structure was enormous, older than it had any right to be, its frame sagging under the weight of decades. Windows reflected the last light of day, pale and watchful. Morgan noted architectural inconsistencies, sections added in different eras, materials scavenged from barns and rail timbers. Leo's camera clicked once, then twice, capturing the outline before the mist began to close again. They crossed the clearing in silence. The air smelled faintly metallic like iron after rain. At the porch, the first figure appeared, tall, deliberate in movement, a shape that filled the doorway without effort. "Evening," the man said. His voice carried easily through the stillness. Morgan identified him at once. Abraham Blackwood, 8th generation, the bloodline's last patriarch. He stepped aside, gesturing them in. The door closed behind them with a sound that didn't echo. The valley had taken them in completely. The door had closed behind them before either researcher had spoken. The air inside was warmer, but it carried the same metallic smell that clung to the valley outside: iron, damp wood, and something faintly organic, like fur that had dried by the fire too long. Abraham Blackwood stood at the center of the main hall. The light from a single oil lamp caught his eyes, turning them the color of old amber. He was taller than Morgan expected, his frame long and stooped, like a man who'd learned to move in low spaces. His handshake was firm but slow, and his fingernails were thick, oddly curved. He introduced his family with practiced formality. Martha, his wife, emerged from a side room carrying a tray of utensils. Her movements were measured, each one deliberate, as if rehearsed. The child, Sarah, appeared next, peering from behind the doorway. She could not have been older than 10. Her skin had the pallor of someone rarely outside, and her eyes, like her father's, reflected more light than they should have. There were others, silhouettes in the background. 2 young men and an older woman, whose names were offered quickly and never repeated. None of them approached close enough for clear observation. Dinner was already laid out. A single long table dominated the room, set with heavy plates and mismatched silverware. The meat served was dark, nearly raw in its center, the smell rich and coppery. Abraham explained that refrigeration was unreliable in the valley. No one else commented. Morgan noted the seating arrangement. Abraham at the head, Martha beside him, the others positioned by apparent age or status. No one ate until he lifted his fork. Even then, conversation was limited to short acknowledgements, a hierarchy enforced by silence rather than command. Leo tried a quiet photograph. The flash failed. He set the camera aside and took to mental notes instead. The family's posture struck him most. Shoulders forward, elbows tucked, heads lowered toward their plates in unison. They ate quickly, efficiently, with small sounds that echoed faintly in the rafters. Midway through the meal, Sarah leaned toward Morgan. Her voice was soft, but the words were distinct. "They say it keeps us close," she said, glancing toward her father. "They say we're never supposed to sleep alone." Abraham looked up before Morgan could respond. "The child speaks out of turn," he said evenly, but there was no anger in it. "Only authority." Sarah lowered her gaze and returned to her food without protest. The rest of the meal passed in near silence. When it ended, Martha cleared the plates while Abraham spoke of weather patterns, failed crops, and the difficulty of bringing supplies into the valley. His language was courteous, his tone steady, but beneath the surface, Morgan sensed performance. Every statement sounded practiced, as if designed to appear normal. When the last dish had been taken away, Abraham stood. "You've come far," he said. "The rooms are ready upstairs. You'll find what you need." Martha handed them 2 candles. The gesture was formal, almost ceremonial. She avoided eye contact but murmured a phrase, something like "rest well before dawn." They climbed the stairs. The house creaked with each step, the sound hollow but alive. Behind them, the family dispersed into shadowed rooms without goodnight or farewell. In the hall above, Morgan paused. From below, faintly through the boards, she could hear a low, rhythmic sound, breathing in sequence, like several lungs sharing one pace. When she turned to Leo, his expression confirmed it. They had entered a home that behaved more like a pack. The house began to settle after midnight, but its quiet was not the kind that brought rest. Timber strained somewhere deep in the walls, followed by a series of hollow knocks that moved slowly from one end of the hallway to the other. The sound was deliberate, measured, as though the house itself were adjusting to the presence of outsiders. Morgan and Leo had been given a narrow room at the far end of the upper floor. The ceiling sloped low, the wallpaper pale and worn smooth by age. A single window looked out toward the valley, but fog pressed against the glass until the world beyond appeared erased. The floorboards tilted slightly toward the door, an architectural flaw that made small objects roll in one direction. Morgan set her field notebook on the desk, recording impressions by lamplight. The structure was intact, but the smell of damp fur persisted in every board. Leo tested the door latch twice before lying down, leaving the camera within reach. Neither spoke of Sarah's words at dinner, though both remembered them. Sometime after 1, the noises changed. The creaking below was replaced by soft friction, bare feet or something close to it dragging along wood. The rhythm paused at intervals, then resumed, as if whoever moved was listening between steps. Morgan marked the time in her notes automatically, then stopped. The movement had reached their door. There was a brief scrape, followed by the unmistakable sound of breathing. It came low, steady, positioned inches from the floor. Something was drawing air through the narrow gap beneath the doorframe, inhaling their scent. Leo sat up without speaking. The two watched the thin strip of light at the base of the door darken as a shadow blocked it. A faint exhale passed through the crack. Wet animal, too strong for a human chest. Then silence. The footsteps resumed, slower now, moving toward the staircase. Each board gave a muted groan, one after another, until the sound faded entirely. They waited several minutes before Morgan rose and pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Only the soft tick of the cooling lamp and the pulse of her own blood. Far below, somewhere in the lower rooms, came the first distant howl. It was not sharp or loud, but long, drawn from the throat of something that had learned how to restrain itself. Another followed it, then another, layered until the sound became less animal than collective. Leo checked the window. The fog glowed faintly with reflected moonlight, but the yard was indistinguishable from sky. He recorded a brief audio clip on his device, though the playback caught only static, punctuated by irregular bursts of sound, like voices behind glass. The house quieted again. Morgan closed her notebook and turned off the lamp. Neither of them mentioned the breathing at the door. They lay awake, waiting for dawn to re-establish order. In the darkness, the house adjusted once more. One long, slow shift in the timber, followed by something small brushing against the window pane, testing its strength. No revelation came, only the steady realization that they were being studied in return. The morning after the sounds, the house behaved as if nothing had happened. The table was reset, the air thick with boiled coffee and wood smoke. No one mentioned the noise from the night before. Abraham greeted them with the same quiet civility, and Martha served breakfast without a word. Only Sarah was missing. Morgan noted her absence but didn't ask. Leo kept the camera down, observing the way Abraham's eyes followed them, unblinking, with a stillness that felt more like calculation than curiosity. When the meal ended, Abraham excused himself to tend to livestock. The others dispersed in silence, leaving the two researchers alone in the hall. It was then that Sarah appeared. She emerged from the narrow stairwell that led to the cellar, barefoot and silent. For a moment, Morgan thought she was another shadow cast by the uneven light, until she moved. Her steps were quick and precise, weight distributed on the balls of her feet, like someone accustomed to moving without sound. "Don't talk loud," she whispered. Her eyes darted toward the doorway before settling back on them. "They hear through the boards." Leo turned on the recorder, covering the red light with his thumb. Morgan crouched to meet the child's gaze, keeping her tone neutral. "What did we hear last night?" Sarah hesitated. The muscles at her jaw flexed as if the question hurt to answer. "They said it's what keeps us together. But it's wrong. They tell us it's our blood." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, restless, her movements too fluid for a child that size. "You should go before the moon gets full again. That's when they change." Morgan wrote the words as she spoke them. "Change how?" Sarah looked down at her hands, turning them palm up. The nails were dark at the base, ridged like new growth. "They say it started with a sickness from the dogs, that it never went away. Some of us get it young." The child glanced toward the stairwell again, listening for footsteps. "Others came before you. They wanted to study us too. They stayed upstairs when they were told not to. They didn't leave." Leo exchanged a look with Morgan but didn't interrupt. Sarah's voice dropped lower, barely audible. "When the moon's full, they sleep downstairs. Together. The ones who stay apart get sick faster." Her tone carried no superstition, only fact. It was the first direct confirmation that something biological had taken root in the family line. Disease, mutation, or adaptation. Sarah's breathing quickened. She reached out, gripping Morgan's sleeve with surprising strength. "Lock your door tonight, no matter what you hear. Don't speak, don't move. If they knock, it's not them anymore." From outside, the sound of boots on gravel cut the moment short. Sarah withdrew her hand instantly. The shift from fear to obedience was complete in one movement. Abraham's voice carried from the porch, steady and close. "Sarah, where are you?" The child stepped backward into the shadows of the stairwell. In the space of a heartbeat, she was gone. No sound, no trace of movement. Morgan looked down at her sleeve where the small handprint of dirt remained, half human, half something else. Leo ended the recording. Neither spoke. The air around them had changed. The silence no longer felt like secrecy. It felt like warning. By morning, the valley had turned grey and still, as if the night had drawn something out of it. The air carried the same metallic tang, faint but unmistakable, and the smell seemed stronger near the ground. Morgan woke before Leo, reviewed her field notes, and marked a single line beneath Sarah's warning. They sleep downstairs together. The phrase read less like superstition now, and more like a protocol. They decided to divide their work. Morgan would examine the house. Leo would survey the property boundaries for any signs of historical use. Abraham approved both suggestions without resistance, though his politeness carried an edge that made the permission feel like surveillance. Leo left first. He followed an overgrown path behind the barn, camera in hand, GPS marking each turn. The slope led him through wet grass to a clearing ringed by leaning stones. At first glance, it was a cemetery. 12 markers in uneven rows, each carved by hand. He recorded every name and date, noting a pattern that tightened with each generation. Early graves bore typical birth and death ranges. Later ones shortened sharply, some to little more than 20 years. Then came the carvings. The oldest stones carried crude crosses. By the 4th generation, symbols began to replace them. Circles bisected by lines, and small engravings that resembled animal tracks. The newest stones abandoned names entirely, replaced by initials and carved depictions of eyes, teeth, or what looked like elongated jaws. He photographed each inscription, scaling with a ruler for proportion. The final marker in the row bore no letters at all, only a set of parallel grooves that looked as though they had been made by claws rather than tools. The grooves were recent, edges still clean, not worn by weather. Back in the house, Morgan worked through the study at the rear of the first floor. The room smelled of dust and oil, the remnants of a place once used for record-keeping. Inside a cabinet, she found a series of notebooks wrapped in waxed cloth. Each was labeled in the same precise handwriting: E. Blackwood, Field Log, 1831-1847. The pages inside were brittle but legible. The first entries chronicled hunting yields, animal behaviors, weather conditions. Later pages shifted in tone. Eli described the death of his dogs from an unknown illness, their bodies stiff and trembling before collapse. He wrote of being bitten while tending one that had turned violent. Within weeks, he began documenting his own symptoms: loss of sleep, changes in appetite, hypersensitivity to smell. The final entries blurred between medical observation and confession. He referred to the sickness as the gift of the wild, believing it was transforming his family into a purer breed. Sketches filled the margins, elongated bones, rearranged teeth, and comparisons between canine and human anatomy drawn side by side. Morgan photographed the pages systematically. Every line suggested continuity, not legend. Whatever began with Eli had persisted through blood, reinforced by isolation and deliberate inbreeding. By late afternoon, Leo returned from the clearing. They compared notes on the porch without speaking at first. His photographs of the grave markers matched her journal excerpts with unnerving precision. The same generational shift, the same iconography. Together, the evidence formed a single conclusion. The Blackwood line had not simply descended into folklore. It had evolved within it. The infection that began with a single bite had not faded. It had adapted. The legends were wrong. The horror in Kine Valley was not born from myth, but from biology. By the following morning, the air inside the house had changed. The warmth from the stove was gone, replaced by a damp chill that clung to every surface. Morgan sensed it before she could name it, the moment hospitality shifted to control. Their equipment was the first sign. When Leo unpacked the field camera, the memory card slot was empty. The replacement drives in his bag were missing too. Morgan's laptop refused to boot beyond a blank screen. The battery drained despite being charged the previous night. Abraham's explanation came quickly. Electronics don't hold up here. The mountain interferes with them. His tone was apologetic, but his eyes remained fixed on the broken device a moment too long. The car followed next. Morgan had requested to leave early, citing weather and data backup needs. Abraham insisted they stay just another night, promising to check the vehicle himself. He returned an hour later, wiping grease from his hands, and claimed the starter was failing. "It'll need parts from town," he said. "We'll send for them tomorrow." There was no road service in the valley, no working phone lines, and no cell reception. The house became a boundary rather than shelter. Doors that had been open the day before were now locked. The study, where Morgan had found Eli's journals, was sealed with a wooden latch she hadn't noticed before. When she asked Martha for access, the woman smiled faintly and said, "Abraham likes to keep the old things safe." Meals were served at rigid hours. Conversation narrowed to pleasantries, weather, livestock, Sarah's schooling, all rehearsed and shallow. Every question beyond that met the same still expression from Abraham, polite and final. Leo began marking times on his watch, recording the rhythm of the house like data points, doors opening and closing, footsteps at exact intervals, voices that murmured low enough to sound like breathing. By the second night, Sarah avoided them entirely. When Morgan caught her near the stairwell, the girl only shook her head and whispered, "You should have left." Her movements were sharper now, her shoulders hunched slightly forward, her gaze constantly flicking toward unseen sounds. Outside, the wind picked up. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Abraham appeared at their door just before dusk, his posture calm, his hands clasped behind his back. "You'll find it best to rest early," he said. "The valley gets restless at night." When he left, the door closed with a soft click that didn't sound like wood. Leo checked the handle. It turned halfway, then stopped. Locked from the outside. He looked at Morgan. "It's not a malfunction," he said quietly. Morgan didn't answer. She crossed to the window instead, brushing away condensation with her sleeve. The clearing below was empty, but fresh footprints dotted the mud near the car. Not boot prints, not quite paw marks either. She wrote one final line in her notebook before closing it. "Control established. Movement restricted. Exit denied." From that point forward, the investigation had ceased to be fieldwork. They were no longer visitors in the valley. They were subjects under observation, and as the last light drained from the sky, both understood what Abraham had already decided. They were not leaving. The lock had been quiet for hours, but the sound of movement above them never stopped. It came in waves. Chairs dragged, boards shifting, low voices reciting words without rhythm. The cadence wasn't religious, it was procedural. Something was being prepared. Morgan had counted the intervals between sounds, trying to determine a pattern, when the latch turned softly from the other side. The door opened only wide enough for a child's hand to slip through. Sarah's face appeared in the narrow space, her expression fixed in urgency rather than fear. "You have to come now," she whispered. Leo hesitated, but Morgan didn't. They followed her into the hallway, moving without light. The girl led them past the main staircase and through a door half hidden behind a hanging quilt. Behind it, a short corridor descended into stone. The air grew colder, the scent of earth and decay thickening with each step. "They're starting," Sarah said. "You can't be here when it begins." From above came the muffled sound of chanting, not melodic but patterned breathing, rising and falling in collective sync. Morgan realized it wasn't language at all, just repetition, like a training exercise for lungs and throat. The rhythm carried weight, vibrating faintly through the walls. At the bottom of the steps, the passage split in two. Sarah guided them to the left, toward a low archway that opened into a cramped series of tunnels. The walls were carved directly from the rock, supported by rough beams that looked scavenged from the house above. They reached a chamber lit by a single lantern. Tables stood in uneven rows covered with old instruments, scalpels, syringes, glass vials clouded with residue. Notations covered the walls in black ink. Anatomical sketches, genealogical charts, cross-sections of muscle and bone labeled in precise, unfamiliar handwriting. On one table lay a set of journals bound in leather. Morgan opened the first. Inside were the notes of a doctor named L. Marin, likely from the mid-20th century. The handwriting was clinical. Subject's physiology responds to lunar cycles as catalyst, not cause. Mutation advances through exposure to infected carriers. Hereditary markers fixed by the third generation. Page after page, documented experiments, serum trials, recorded outcomes, failures. One vial was still intact, sealed with black wax, labeled simply Inhibitor, Test 7B. The fluid inside was amber, viscous. Leo photographed everything quickly, aware of the time marked by the rhythmic noise above. It was closer now, joined by the scraping of wood and the shuffle of bare feet. Morgan asked Sarah where the doctor had gone. The girl pointed to the far corner, where a small square of stone bore an engraved name, Merrin. The grave had been built into the wall itself. When the first tremor rolled through the floor, Sarah flinched but didn't run. "It's starting," she said again. "They do it to keep the sickness from spreading." Her pupils had dilated unnaturally wide. Under the dim lantern, the skin around her neck showed faint ridges, thin as scars but moving with her pulse. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. Morgan knelt beside her. "When does it stop?" Sarah shook her head once. "It doesn't. They said it makes us stronger." From the floor above came a collective exhale, dozens of lungs drawing breath at once, followed by the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the boards. Morgan pocketed the vial, closed the journal and motioned toward the next tunnel. They had proof now, but it had cost them the illusion of safety. As they moved deeper underground, Sarah's steps grew lighter, faster, her hands twitching against the stone as though testing new reflexes. Her shadow no longer matched her frame. The ritual had begun, and the first change was happening inside her. The lantern light trembled as the first shout carried through the tunnels. Abraham's voice. Low and commanding, the sound of control fracturing. They had been discovered. Morgan led them deeper into the stone corridors, careful to keep the vial from shaking in her hand. The path narrowed into a space lined with rusted metal shelves. Most were empty, but at the far end stood a workstation, glass beakers, a microscope, and handwritten charts curling with age. The room smelled of chemicals and rot, the remnants of experiments left to die with their creator. Leo wiped dust from the table surface, revealing pages beneath a pane of glass. They were the doctor's final reports, written in the same controlled script as the journals upstairs. Each sheet contained tables of data, dosage measurements, and genetic diagrams marked Phase 3, neurological degradation. Morgan skimmed the notes, her training shifting from observation to analysis. "It's not mythology," she said quietly. "It's a prion disorder. Transmissible, progressive, hereditary, like a misfolded protein." The doctor thought he could stabilize it. The vials on the shelf were labeled with dates that stretched across 3 decades. Most were empty. One remained sealed. The label read Series 7B, Inhibitor. Morgan broke the wax with her thumbnail and drew a single dose into the syringe still lying beside it. The liquid was thick, amber-colored, refracting light like oil. Sarah had collapsed against the wall, her breathing shallow and erratic. The skin at her throat twitched with fine tremors. Her fingers flexed in spasms, nails darkening at the base. "It hurts," she whispered. "Inside." Morgan hesitated for only a moment before injecting a minimal dose into Sarah's arm. The reaction was immediate. Her pulse steadied, the convulsion slowing within seconds. The ridges along her neck flattened, color returning to her face. She looked up, blinking rapidly as if emerging from deep water. Leo recorded the result, time-stamping it against the notes on the wall. "Temporary inhibition," he said. "Maybe hours, maybe less." Above them, the chanting had stopped. Silence, followed by the creak of boards and the faint clatter of something metallic hitting the floor. Abraham's voice filled the gap, closer now, echoing through the stone. "Sarah, come back to us." The sound carried differently underground, a resonance that made it hard to tell direction. It came from everywhere at once. Sarah flinched, pressing her hands over her ears. Morgan gathered the notes, folding pages into her jacket. "We need to move." Leo doused the lantern, leaving only the weak glow of the emergency flashlight. The tunnels branched in 3 directions. One sloped upward, the others downward into darkness. They chose the deeper path, where air flowed faintly from below, a sign of another exit, or at least a new chamber. As they moved, footsteps multiplied above. Wood splintered, a door gave way. Voices overlapped, not words, but low growls straining toward speech. The pursuit had begun. Sarah stumbled once, caught herself, and kept running. The serum was holding, but her movements had grown unsteady, coordination flickering between human and something else. The flashlight beam wavered across walls marked with more symbols, spirals, double helixes, handprints half the size of normal palms. Behind them, Abraham's voice grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of claws scraping stone. "You shouldn't have taken her," he called. "She belongs to the line." Morgan didn't look back. She tightened her grip on the remaining vials and pulled Sarah forward. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of wet soil and open space. The next turn opened into darkness so complete that even sound seemed swallowed by it. Somewhere behind, the echo of pursuit shifted. Faster now, 4 limbs instead of 2. They ran, the light barely holding, the evidence clutched tight in Morgan's hands. The doctor's cure had failed long ago, but tonight it was the only thing keeping the last of Sarah's humanity intact. The tunnel ended in a fracture of stone that opened into the base of a hillside. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and heavy with smoke. Morgan pulled Sarah through the gap first, then Leo. The sound of pursuit had fallen away, replaced by something worse, an ordered quiet, the kind that precedes coordination. They emerged behind the farmhouse, hidden beneath a line of half-collapsed sheds. Above them, the structure pulsed with light, not candlelight or fire, but the steady orange flicker of lamps arranged in a circle around the clearing. Shadows moved in slow procession, human in form but too fluid in motion. Leo crawled to the edge of the brush and lifted his camera. The lens caught the first clear view of the ritual. The family, 8 of them, maybe more, had gathered in a wide ring. Abraham stood at its center, stripped to the waist, his spine curved in a way no human skeleton should have allowed. His shoulder blades protruded sharply, skin stretched thin over bone. Martha moved beside him, her hair matted and wet, face tilted upward as if listening to a frequency beyond hearing. The others circled outward, hands pressed to the earth, their breathing synchronized. Every inhale drew the shoulders forward, every exhale lengthened the neck and jaw. The sound was rhythmic, mechanical, an induced transformation through controlled respiration. Morgan noted the sequence automatically, her mind dividing observation from horror. Prolonged hyperventilation, muscular contraction along the thoracic spine, partial dislocation of the jaw hinge, tissue elongation at the fingers and feet. The bodies convulsed without blood or screaming, the process efficient, biological, not supernatural. Skin thickened along the forearms, nails blackened, irises expanded to near total darkness. When they stood again, they moved as a single organism, posture aligned, eyes reflecting the same dim orange of the lanterns. Leo shifted position for a clearer shot. The motion drew attention. A single head turned, Abraham's, and the rhythm stopped. "Go," Morgan hissed, but too late. The patriarch's face caught the light, features distorted yet aware. His nostrils flared, identifying scent rather than sight. He barked a short command, and 3 figures broke from the circle, moving on all 4s with terrifying speed. Leo ran left, drawing them away from Morgan and Sarah. The camera hit the ground, lens cracking against the rock. The first pursuer reached him at the edge of the clearing, a blur of muscle and sound. He shouted once, a warning more than a cry, before the noise was consumed by motion. Sarah clutched Morgan's arm, trembling. The smell of blood drifted through the night air, faint and copper-rich. Above the circle, the chanting resumed, lower, deeper, almost subterranean in pitch. "They're finishing it," Sarah said, her voice breaking through uneven breath. Her pupils were dilating again, pulse racing beneath the skin. The serum was failing. Morgan pulled her closer, but the girl's gaze was locked on the figures. "They're calling me," she whispered. "I can feel it." The rhythmic breathing intensified, each exhale echoing through the valley like coordinated machinery. The pack had found its center, its unity restored. Sarah pressed her hands to her ears, shaking her head violently. "I'm not like them," she said, louder now, the words cracking. "I won't be." Her teeth clenched as a spasm rippled through her jawline. The ridges along her neck rose again, faint but visible under the skin. Morgan watched, helpless as biology began to overrule willpower. From the clearing came Abraham's voice, steady and cold. "The blood remembers." Sarah's breathing grew shallow, but she didn't move toward him. Her fingers dug into the soil, anchoring herself by force. Morgan held her still, whispering calm instruction, each word deliberate, clinical, breathing pattern, focus, resistance. For several seconds, Sarah held. The muscle contractions eased, the tremor slowed. Her body stilled enough for her to lift her head. The chanting continued, distant and relentless, but she no longer moved with it. The pull of blood was real, and for now she had resisted. The chanting had fractured into noise by the time they reached the edge of the clearing. The pattern that once synchronized the family had collapsed into chaos, panting, snarling human syllables drowned in instinct. Morgan guided Sarah through the trees, keeping low, navigating by memory toward the old cemetery Leo had discovered earlier that day. Fog drifted between the gravestones, dense and cold enough to sting the skin. The ground was soft, disturbed by fresh tracks, bare feet and something heavier, claws dragging through wet soil. Sarah stumbled once but recovered quickly. Her breathing was erratic, the serum's effect fading by the minute. They had almost cleared the ridge when a figure stepped from behind one of the tilted stones. Martha stood blocking the path, her dress torn, face streaked with mud and blood that wasn't hers. In the dim light, her posture shifted between two forms, shoulders squared one moment, hunched the next, like a body caught mid-conversion. Morgan froze. Sarah's fingers tightened around her wrist. "Mama," the girl whispered. Martha's eyes flicked toward her, bright with a reflection that wasn't human. Her jaw trembled, as though struggling to shape words around something that wanted to be a growl. "You shouldn't be here," she managed, voice rasped raw. "They'll come for you both," she said, stepping closer. "He already knows." Morgan took a cautious step back, gauging distance, roots. But Martha didn't advance. Her expression was torn by something deeper than fear, recognition, conflict, love clashing with compulsion. Her hands trembled, half extended toward her daughter, fingers curled like claws she refused to use. Sarah stepped forward. "We can fix it," she said, voice shaking. "The doctor found a way." Martha shook her head. "There's no fixing what's been chosen. You don't unmake blood." The words faltered. Then her tone shifted, softer, almost pleading. "But you can leave it behind." The sound of pursuit grew nearer, Abraham's measured pace followed by the erratic rhythm of the others. The trees at the far end of the graveyard began to move. Shapes flickered between them, low to the ground, advancing fast. Martha turned toward the sound. Her breath hitched. Her body stiffened as if obeying a command she couldn't ignore. When she looked back, her face was wet with tears that evaporated before they fell. "Go," she said, louder this time, pushing Sarah toward Morgan. "Go now." "Mama." Martha's transformation broke through then, brief and violent. Her spine arched. A low sound tore from her throat, half scream, half roar. She turned away from them, facing the oncoming shapes. The movement was deliberate, protective. Morgan grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the southern edge of the cemetery. Behind them, the noise of impact filled the air, bodies colliding, snarls blending with the heavy thud of flesh against stone. At the far corner, the ground dipped where the doctor's tunnels opened into the hillside. The entrance was half collapsed, concealed by vines and soil. Morgan pushed Sarah through first, then followed, sliding down into darkness. The last thing she saw before the black closed in was Martha standing alone among the graves, back to them, arms outstretched against the pack that rushed her. There was no sound of pain, only the echo of her defiance, a single guttural roar swallowed by the night. Then silence. Morgan struck her flashlight. The beam caught rough stone, old pipes, and the tunnel stretching ahead. She pulled Sarah forward. The air smelled of dust and iron. Behind them, the world above erupted again, but now it was distant, sealed off by earth and time. They moved quickly, neither speaking. There was no victory in survival, only motion. The valley had claimed its due, and somewhere above, a mother had bought them one final chance to run. The tunnel carried them deeper than either expected. The air grew colder, the walls damp with mineral sweat. Each turn felt older, less deliberate, as though the earth itself had started swallowing the structure. They moved in silence, guided by the narrow beam of Morgan's flashlight and the faint echo of pursuit closing somewhere behind them. When the tunnel widened, it revealed a chamber larger than any before, a buried facility carved from stone and reinforced with steel plates. Tables lay overturned, papers scattered across the floor like snowdrifts. Glass vials caught the light in dull glints, most shattered, some intact. Morgan steadied her breath and began scanning the tables. The remnants of scientific work were everywhere. Microscopes, centrifuge parts, racks of slides labeled in fading ink. Dust coated everything except the central desk, where recent movement had cleared a small patch of surface. Someone had been here long after the doctor's death. She opened the nearest drawer. Inside were bound lab records, each page filled with dense annotations and genetic diagrams. The handwriting was precise, steady, professional. She recognized the same hand from the journal she'd found upstairs, Dr. Merrin's. The final entries shifted from observation to instruction. Generation 8 shows recessive tolerance. Serum batch 9C demonstrates partial inhibition, but fails under lunar excitation. Subject S3 shows slowed degeneration at 0.6 ml dosage. Morgan turned the page and froze. A sample list ran down the margin, each entry coded by initials and age. One name stood out, S. Blackwood, age 9. She looked up at Sarah. The girl stared back, wordless. Leo scanned the perimeter, gathering photographs and loose data sheets, each image time-stamped automatically. "We can prove it now," he said, voice low. "This isn't folklore, it's controlled inheritance." Morgan found a tray of sealed vials near the back of the room, labels half erased by condensation. She brushed one clean and read the inscription, Series 9C, Subject S3. Inside was a viscous amber liquid, identical to the earlier inhibitor but clearer, purer. It might have been the final iteration, the last attempt to correct the line. She placed the vial carefully in her jacket pocket, wrapping it in cloth. "This is our evidence," she said. "Everything else burns." From the tunnel behind them came the first sound, a single footstep, slow and deliberate, followed by another. The pack had found the entrance. Leo killed the flashlight, leaving only the weak red glow from his camera's standby light. The silence that followed was absolute, until the faint scrape of claws against metal broke it again. Morgan stuffed the remaining notes into her satchel and moved to the far wall. There, half hidden by debris, she found a rusted ladder leading upward into darkness. The rungs led to a trapdoor sealed with soil. Above, faint through the packed earth, came the rhythmic thud of movement, the pack circling. She turned to Sarah. "We go now." Leo boosted the girl first, then passed up the bag. The wood groaned under her weight but held. Morgan climbed next, forcing the door open just enough for cold air to pour through. Beyond it, the outline of an old shed stood against the faint light of dawn. They surfaced into the open air, dragging themselves through loose dirt and splinters. Behind them the tunnel echoed with noise, not speech but breath, dozens of lungs pulling the same air. Morgan slammed the trapdoor shut and wedged it with a length of broken timber. Leo pulled her to her feet. The shed around them was half collapsed, its walls thin enough to show light bleeding through the cracks. Outside, the sound of movement spread through the trees. The pack was above ground now. Morgan tightened the strap on her satchel, checking the vial once more. It was unbroken. "Head for the stream," she said. "Stay low." They ran from the shed into the gray light, every step carrying the weight of proof in her jacket pocket. The cure existed, incomplete but real. And behind them, in the dark of the valley, the Blackwoods were coming. The shed collapsed seconds after they cleared it. The impact came like thunder, splintering boards and throwing dirt into the air. Abraham's silhouette filled the opening, broad, bent, a body rebuilt by generations of decay and adaptation. His breathing carried through the dawn fog, slow and deliberate, tracking by scent more than sight. Morgan pulled Sarah toward the tree line. Leo followed, limping from where a falling beam had grazed his leg. Blood darkened his pant leg enough to leave a trail. She tore fabric from her sleeve and tied it tight above the wound, knowing it would only slow him down temporarily. "Keep to the stream," she said. It was the first full sentence since they'd surfaced. They reached the waterline as another crash split the air behind them. The shed gave way completely, timbers scattering. From the debris came the sound of movement, many feet, claws against wood. The pack had surfaced. Morgan dropped into the stream first. The water was near freezing, running strong enough to pull at her balance. Leo carried Sarah, keeping her above the current as they waded downstream. The sound of pursuit grew louder, echoing between trees. The pack didn't howl now. They moved in silence, trained through instinct, spreading wide to close distance. Abraham's steps were distinct among them, heavier, measured, the pace of something that knew it would not need to run for long. The flashlight had died hours ago. Only the gray rise of dawn guided them. Morgan's fingers were numb, gripping the small satellite phone she had found in the shed. The casing was cracked, battery at 9%. No signal bar showed, but she pressed the power anyway. The screen flickered to life. She held it above the waterline, thumb hovering. "We're not high enough for signal," Leo said, voice low and broken by breath. "Then we climb." They left the stream at a bend where the bank rose sharply. Morgan led them up the incline, mud slipping beneath their boots. She tried again. This time a single bar appeared, faint but real. She keyed 911. Static filled the line first. Then a voice, distant, professional. "Emergency services. What's your location?" Morgan gave coordinates from memory, truncated but close. Kine Valley. 2 survivors. Ongoing pursuit. Biological hazard. The words blurred into a hiss as the signal cut, then returned in bursts. "Hold position. Units en route." It was enough. She pocketed the phone and turned back toward the sound. The forest was moving. Shapes darted between trees, gray limbs, glinting eyes, the blur of muscle under skin. Leo slipped, catching himself against a fallen trunk. Abraham appeared next, not running but advancing in long, precise strides. His body no longer obeyed human proportion. The arms reached almost to the knees, fingers ending in blunt, bone-thick nails. He carried no expression of rage, only certainty. Sarah froze at the sight, a single sound escaping her throat, half word, half cry. "Father." The hesitation cost them seconds. Abraham turned his head toward her, nostrils flaring as he inhaled. The others halted behind him, waiting. For a moment the world held still. Then light broke across the ridge, headlights cutting through mist. The crack of engines followed, heavy tires grinding over roots and rock. A floodlight snapped on, painting the trees in white glare. Abraham flinched first, the light searing his night-adapted eyes. The pack recoiled but did not scatter. "Sheriff's office," a voice shouted. "Hands where we can see them." Morgan pushed Sarah behind her, raising one arm high. Leo struggled upright, blood running freely down his leg. Abraham's eyes narrowed against the light, pupils shrinking to points. The muscles across his back tensed. Every line of him pulled between attack and retreat. Behind the glare, the first officer stepped forward, weapon drawn but shaking. For a second, everything held. The family, the fugitives, the men with rifles, all frozen in the thin divide between night and morning. Then Abraham moved. By sunrise, Kine Valley was sealed off. Sheriff's units, state police, and emergency medical teams filled the clearing where the shed had once stood. The first report listed 6 confirmed casualties, 4 unaccounted for. The air smelled of smoke and antiseptic. Morgan's statement was taken before she'd even had time to wash the dirt from her hands. Her notes, the vial, and Leo's damaged camera were collected as evidence. A mobile command post was set up near the ridgeline. The words biohazard containment began appearing on radio chatter within an hour. Sarah was transported under guard to a temporary field unit. Blood samples were drawn and immediately rushed to a university lab in Chicago. The preliminary report identified unfamiliar protein structures within her genome. Folding patterns resembling prion behavior, but stable rather than degenerative. The lead investigator described it as a transmissible adaptation of unknown origin. Abraham and the surviving members of the family never entered custody. Officers reported movement in the tree line during the first hour of daylight. Figures retreating into the northern forest, fast and silent. Search teams followed but lost the trail at the ravine. By noon, the command declared the valley under quarantine. Leo's injury required surgery but not amputation. His official account matched Morgan's, though details were redacted in the public summary. The Blackwood property was later condemned and burned under supervision. The fire lasted 2 days, exposing foundations that dated back almost 2 centuries. Inside the ash, investigators found remnants of glass vials, surgical tools, and fragments of journals consistent with Morgan's recovered materials. Dr. Merrin's handwriting was confirmed through historical records. The federal report classified the incident as localized genetic contamination following long-term isolation and bioexperimental inheritance. Sarah's condition stabilized after multiple doses of the remaining serum. The physical anomalies, extended nails, discoloration, irregular pupils, receded within weeks. Her metabolic readings, however, remained outside normal human range. In controlled lighting, her eyes reflected amber under infrared exposure. She was placed in private care, name withheld from all subsequent documentation. The file listed her as S3, continuing Marin's designation system. Treatment focused on protein suppression and environmental conditioning. The attending physician noted an unusual side effect: heightened sensory response to scent and sound, particularly nocturnal stimuli. Morgan returned to Chicago with the official investigation team. Her final report, submitted 3 months later, concluded that the Blackwood bloodline represented a genetically transmissible hybridization event arising from a zoonotic pathogen first recorded in 1831. The paper was archived under restricted access, marked unsuitable for publication. The valley was eventually cleared, fenced, and left uninhabited. The quarantine order expired after 2 years. Locals still refused to approach it. Hunters claimed to hear movement near the tree line during winter months, sounds that stopped the moment they were noticed. Of the Blackwood lineage, only 2 physical samples remained in storage: a vial of serum labeled 9C and a preserved tissue sample coded S3B. Both were stored under frozen containment at a federal facility. The last field note in Morgan's file summarized the case with characteristic restraint. Biological mutation confirmed. Transmission potential reduced but not eliminated. Subject shows partial reversion. Containment inconclusive. No further sightings were confirmed. But weeks after the site was closed, a forestry drone captured a still image from the northern ridge. In the shadow beneath the trees, 2 reflective points stared back at the lens. Small, symmetrical, and amber. Nothing moved when the drone passed overhead. The forest simply waited. If this file unsettled you, there are more waiting in the archives. Like the video to help us recover the next record, and subscribe to X Archives so you never miss a case that was meant to stay buried. Because every click brings another forgotten story back to light.